You say you want peace, but why does silence feel like weakness? Why does not defending yourself burn deeper than the insult itself? Maybe it's because we've been taught that strength means striking back, speaking up, proving our point. But here's the truth. Most people can't stomach. Every time you react, you're giving someone else the remote control to your emotions and that craving to be understood, that desperate need to explain yourself. It's not power, it's a quiet kind of slavery. The Stoics knew this. They didn't waste time debating fools. They mastered the one thing most people never do: their response, because real power isn't loud, it's composed. It doesn't chase validation, it commands presence. So before you waste one more word on someone who doesn't deserve your energy, listen close. What you're about to hear will tear through your excuses and hand you something most people never find: complete control over your inner world. And if that kind of clarity means something to you, there's one simple way to keep it coming. Hit that subscribe button. Let's build something stronger together. There's a certain kind of person who feeds on your reaction, not your opinion, not your truth, your reaction. They throw a jab, a sideways comment, a passive-aggressive insult, not to start a dialogue, but to hijack your emotional state. And the moment you take the bait, the moment you let it get under your skin, they win something far more valuable than the argument. They win your energy, your attention, your control. That's the real cost. It's not about whether you were right. It's about whether you stayed rooted in your own frame. Marcus Aurelius said, "You always own the option of having no opinion." That's not apathy. It's discipline. It's knowing that you don't owe anyone access to your inner world. You can observe the chaos without absorbing it. You can hear the insult without becoming it. That's not weakness, that's power. Most people can't even comprehend, and let's be honest. Most arguments aren't about truth. They're about ego, yours and theirs. They want to pull you into their storm so they don't have to sit in it alone. But if you've ever tried to reason with someone who just wants a fight, you know it's like wrestling with fog. No matter how sharp your logic, it won't land, because logic was never the goal. As Carl Jung put it, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, but only if we don't get lost in the noise. So what if you stopped reacting? What if you let them talk, rant, provoke, and you stayed still? Not because you're shutting down, but because you're choosing your peace, because you know the value of your presence, your calm, your clarity. Socrates once said, "Strong minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, weak minds discuss people." Most provocations are small talk for the weak-minded. Don't join the table. You don't need to respond to every comment, defend every opinion, or explain every choice. That's the trap. That's how you lose sight of your own power, by trying to validate it for someone else. Plato taught that the wise man speaks because he has something to say, not because he has to say something, and that silence, when held with intention, is one of the sharpest forms of speech there is. When you don't react, you make people confront themselves. That's why it's so uncomfortable for them, because silence is a mirror. It reflects back their insecurity, their need for validation, their desperation to be seen. Aristotle believed that knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom, and once you truly know yourself, you stop handing out pieces of your peace just to prove you're solid. You already know you are. There's a line people cross when they pull you into their drama, and it's easy to miss 1 second. You're calm, clear, focused, The next, you're lured into a verbal tug-of-war that wasn't even your fight, and that's the trap. Because the second you start arguing, you've already stepped off solid ground. You've entered their frame, their rhythm, their rules. Now you're reacting. Now you're performing. Now you're playing defense on a field they designed. The Stoics warned us never let someone else dictate your response. Epictetus said, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. That hits hard, because it means the moment we engage, we're not just losing the argument, we're giving away our self-command, not because we're wrong, but because we abandoned the one thing we were supposed to guard, our own frame. And look, people don't argue to learn, they argue to be right. Arguing rarely brings resolution. What it brings is pride, posturing a deeper attachment to whatever false belief they're clinging to. As Carl Jung put it, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. That includes arguing with no intention of hearing you, because the moment it becomes about being right, truth has already left the room. Even Socrates, who built his legacy on I'm uncertain of what you'll do next. And that uncertainty, that's power, because while others are busy explaining themselves into corners, you're holding position, undisturbed and unreadable. When you argue, you're opening a door. You're showing your cards. You reveal what gets under your skin, where your limits are, how easily you're shaken. You hand over the map to your emotional terrain, and if the person in front of you knows how to navigate it, you've just given them the upper hand. Socrates mastered the art of asking. Instead of telling, his power wasn't in having the answers. It was in leading others to uncover their own silence. Does something similar. It doesn't force. It invites it, creates space. And in that space, people reveal more about themselves than they ever would. In an argument, they show their fears, their ego, their hunger for reaction. And when you give them none of it, you rise above it all. There's a subtle kind of strength that most people miss. It's not loud. It doesn't seek attention. It doesn't chase applause. It moves in silence, waits in stillness, and strikes with precision. When the time is right, that's the difference between reacting and responding, between trying to prove yourself and simply proving it without the noise. Because the truth is explaining too much is often just insecurity dressed up as logic. When you know who you are, you stop needing to narrate every move. The Stoics didn't speak for recognition. They acted in alignment with virtue, regardless of whether the world understood or approved. Seneca said, waste no time arguing what a good man should be one. It's that simple. Stop telling people who you are. Show them. Stop posting your intentions. Deliver the outcome. Let your discipline do the talking. Carl Jung warned that you are what you do not, what you say you'll do. That hits differently when you catch yourself over-explaining your plans, your dreams, your values to people who aren't even listening. Silence isn't avoidance. It's strategy. It's knowing that energy is currency, and not everyone deserves a transaction. Aristotle believed that excellence is not an act, but a habit. That means it doesn't need a spotlight. It doesn't need a microphone. It needs consistency, quiet, steady, unshakable execution. While others are busy rehearsing their explanations, trying to convince people of their worth. The disciplined are already building, already winning, already proving everything without having to say anything. Socrates taught by asking questions, not by demanding attention. He knew that transformation doesn't happen through force. It happens through clarity, and clarity doesn't need defense if your values are clear, your mission sharp, your energy focused. Then explaining yourself becomes a waste. The more solid you are internally, the less you need external validation. You don't need to explain why you cut someone off, why you stayed quiet in the meeting, why you didn't reply to that passive-aggressive message. You're not being rude. You're being intentional. You're conserving your fire for something that matters, because when you finally do move, when you deliver the result, the shift, the outcome, it lands like thunder. No warning, no build-up, just impact. There's a certain kind of power that only shows up when you don't respond. Not because you didn't have something to say, but because you knew saying it would have cost more than it's worth. That's the kind of restraint most people can't understand, because they're still addicted to validation. They need to be seen, heard, right. But when you've outgrown that, when you're not looking for approval, the game changes. You stop fighting battles that lead nowhere. You stop stepping into the mud just to prove you don't belong there. Stoicism is rooted in this idea that we are responsible for our own minds, our own reactions, our own peace. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed, and you haven't been." That mindset flips everything it means. Their insult doesn't land unless you give it a place. To land, their chaos doesn't matter unless you invite it in. And when you don't, when you stay composed, still grounded, it exposes them, not you. Think about the last time someone tried to get a rise out of you and you stayed silent. Remember how they stumbled after? How they started backtracking, explaining themselves, even getting louder, trying to get something, anything out of you? That's because silence is uncomfortable for them when you don't react. People have to sit in the space they created, and most can't handle their own energy without a response to bounce it off. Plato said, "Wise men speak because they have something to say. Fools because they have to say something in those moments when tension fills the air and everyone's waiting for a reaction." Silence becomes a statement. A loud one. Not passive, powerful, because it tells the room everything it needs to know. You're not here to play small games. You're not here to prove yourself. You've already won by staying centered. Socrates believed in quest. That silence you hold, it becomes a weight they weren't prepared to carry. The Stoics didn't chase conflict. They trained for clarity. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." That pause. You take the breath instead of the backlash. That's where power lives, not in raising your voice, but in refusing to hand over your peace just because someone else dropped theirs. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He said everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, but only if you don't get pulled into their chaos, only if you hold the mirror up and watch, because when you stay silent, people don't know where to aim. They start projecting, revealing, unraveling, not because you attacked, but because you didn't. Aristotle spoke of moderation, the golden mean, not too much, not too little. Stillness is exactly that. Not absence, not apathy. Just a balanced response in a world addicted to overreaction. When you withhold what they expect, anger, defensiveness, validation, you force them to deal with themselves. And for most, that's far more uncomfortable than anything you could have said. Socrates believed that the unexamined life is not worth living. Stillness gives people that rare, uncomfortable gift space to examine. and they won't thank you for it. But they will remember it because silence sticks, it lingers, it creates an echo. They have to sit with some people, walk in, and instantly take up space without raising their voice, without announcing themselves. They don't dominate through volume. They lead through presence, and that presence, it's not random. It's built through discipline, restraint, and choosing when to speak, and more importantly, when not to, because once you realize that every word has weight, you stop wasting them on noise. The Stoics lived by this. Seneca wrote, "Speech is the mirror of the mind." So what are you reflecting when you talk just to fill silence, when you answer questions? No one asked or defend choices, no one challenged. The quiet ones, the ones who only speak when it matters. They're not being mysterious, they're being precise. They know their voice hits harder when it's not constantly echoing in the background. Carl Jung said solitude is for me a fount of healing, which makes my life worth living. That solitude, that space between thoughts and responses. That's where clarity sharpens and people feel it. They don't just hear what you say. They sense the intention behind it, the restraint, the control. That's what shifts a room without saying much at all. Aristotle believed that the wise man speaks not because he must, but because he has something to say in every interaction. There's a decision. Am I speaking from impulse or from awareness? The quiet ones have trained that awareness. They've learned to sit with their thoughts, instead of spilling them, to listen longer, to move second, and strike first. Socrates made his impact through questions, not monologues. His brilliance wasn't in saying more, it was in guiding others to say less and mean more. And that's the paradox. Most people miss the fewer words you use, the more powerful they become when you're not constantly explaining, defending, or reacting. Your words start to carry a different kind of weight. There comes a point where you stop explaining your piece. Not because you're better than anyone, but because you've learned the cost of chaos and it's not worth it. You're not being cold when you choose space. You're being clear. Clear about your energy. Clear about your boundaries. Clear about what you're no longer willing to tolerate just to make someone else comfortable. The Stoics weren't emotional shut-ins, they were masters of internal order. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily the tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say or think or do. Only what you do. That's not disconnection. That's alignment. You're not avoiding people. You're avoiding unnecessary noise, drama, projections. People who don't ask how you're doing, they just assume. And when you don't play along, they call it distant. Carl Jung noted the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But that process, it gets quieter, cleaner, sharper. And as you get more centered, the expectations from others start to feel heavier. The need to reply, to explain, to prove, it falls off. Because clarity doesn't chase understanding. It simply stands when someone says you're acting different. Maybe that's true. Maybe you've outgrown conversations that loop in circles. Maybe your silence isn't withdrawal. It's a filter. You're not here to fix what you didn't break. You're here to move forward with intention. Plato said, "The soul thrives when it turns inward." And that kind of self-awareness doesn't always look social. Let them say you're cold. Let them misunderstand your stillness. That's not your burden. You're not here to audition for approval. You're here to live in alignment with your values, your focus, your peace. And if someone can't sit with you in that clarity, then maybe they were only drawn to your